Hello, everybody, and welcome back to episode number 2 of the Jank Tank. We'll get the numbers right eventually. My name is Timothy Zaccanino. I'm going to be one of your hosts today, and I am joined by two other co-hosts today, Mr. Christopher Sofsky, Teld. They simp for Surge Engine, but they're here to join us to talk about Blue in the historic card pool and Blue in general. How are we doing? Thanks for pulling yourself away from Baldur's Gate to come talk about Arena Cube with us.
It was kind of tough, I'm not going to lie. I'm going to be away from my computer for the next 4 days at the beach, and if I'm really, really honest, fuck the ocean, sand, and hanging out with girls. I kind of just want to play Baldur's Gate in my underwear for the next 3 days.
Yeah, I'm actually going to a concert tomorrow, and it's I have to tear myself away from Baldur's Gate for 4 hours to go do this, and I'm excited, but at the same time, that game is great.
Guerrilla Larian marketing.
I don't think even at this point I need to play Baldur's Gate because I've heard so much about it from so many other people that I just kind of know what's going on. Apparently there's a character called the Bitch Queen, and I had to ask my other Discord what that was all about, but they explained it. I don't know anything about D&D, but thankfully...
Don't we all know a character named that?
Thankfully we get to talk about Magic today and not D&D, so a little bit more of my wheelhouse. We are going to be talking about Blue today. Just for reference, this is technically episode 2. Me and Chris sat down and did an entire Lord of the Rings review, but as it turns out, my, at the time, 4-month-old child didn't like being quiet during that review, so the audio was at a point where it just wasn't something I was comfortable putting out there for people to listen to. So we didn't get that out. We're recording now with an episode that we've wanted to do for a very long time, and I think, honestly, if we had done this Blue kind of summary / retrospective, whatever you want to call it, 2 or 3 months ago, it'd be more of a rant piece. But things are kind of changing around to the point where we don't have to just sit here and complain and gripe about what's going on with Blue. So we've got a little bit of positive,
I'll still be funny.
Yeah, to go with the negative. So before we get into the main topic here, do you guys just want to throw out what's your favorite Blue card in the cube right now in our Arena historic unrestricted cube? I've got one in mind, but
you go first, and then Teld, because I know Teld has an absolute favorite, and he's going to give a Teld talk on it. So,
well,
and then
mine's pretty easy. It's a new one. It's Lorien Revealed, just because it's new, and I found that it has so many little niche things going on in the cube, despite being a card that on first glance looks pretty miserably bad. It just does so many different things. It finds your islands for your mystic sanctuaries and your archmage's charms. It fixes, which is not something I really considered when these cards came out. You can cycle it to go find a triome. Gets a spell in your graveyard very easily for anything that cares about that. I just really like the card, even though 5 mana sorcery speed draw 3 is objectively just not a good card. The cycling on it just makes that card so much more playable. So I've really enjoyed basically replacing an island with that and just adding a couple extra synergies to my deck, my spells matters decks particularly. Tell favorite Blue card?
Yeah, just curious, Chris. What card do you think I'm going to talk about?
I also have a guess.
I can do the theme song, or or you can just tell us.
Okay, yeah. Affectionately referring to Chromo Sea Shark as Baby Shark has kind of become the new deal around here. I'm big on this card. I think it is the best Blue card in the cube. I think it completely just does everything I want my Blue card to do, which is it's got 4 toughness, so it blocks. I'll get more to that later, but it blocks, it attacks, it makes dudes, it blocks with those things. You wrath it, you get a 4/4. It does everything, and it's one of those we joke about Mole Slayers and stuff like that. It feels like that's kind of what Blue's version of that looks like. It's probably the biggest miss I've ever had on a card evaluation. At least
we all missed it.
Well, we all did, and we all talked about it too as the thing. And I remember we all were kind of discussing that if you're playing small ball spells, paying 2 to incubate a small token does not seem like a good deal. But it turns out that later in the game, material is just material, right?
Yeah, it turns out Blue's also really good at holding open the mana. So, you'll hold open a counter spell, right? And then if you don't have to use it, you just cash in, crack your egg and get your 2/2 or your 1/1. And the 1/1 and 2/2s just, they end up mattering when you get a bunch of them for free.
Yes, but the shark will be coming up again later in the episode when we discuss some stuff. My personal favorite Blue card, and not because I think it's the strongest Blue card, but just because it's my actual favorite, is Teferi Temporal Pilgrim. For those of you who are not familiar with it, Teferi is a 5-mana Blue Planeswalker from, what is this set with the gear again?
Brothers War.
Yep. Okay. So it has a static. Whenever you draw a card, you put a loyalty counter on Teferi Temporal Pilgrim. It has a +0 to draw a card. It's effectively kind of like a +1. -2, make a 2/2 blue spirit creature token with vigilance, and whenever you draw a card, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature, and then a -12, it doesn't matter. So it synergizes with drawing cards, which is what your blue deck already wants to be doing. It's effectively +2ing every turn if you're drawing cards off of it because you're natural drawing. And the tokens have vigilance, which is massive. Like, I think that single line of text almost makes this card, because once it lands, if you don't have removal for the creature, I mean, it's honestly, it's better for you if you have removal to deal with the token while it's small, if you have a board to deal with the Teferi, because if you just Murderous Rider the Teferi or something, and you don't have a way to deal with the token, it doesn't grow because Teferi is on the battlefield. It has that property, so every time they draw a card for the rest of the game, that token is just becoming a bigger and bigger vigilance threat. And I'm so stoked on this card because I like the design, but also because for the longest time, blue was like the only color in our cube that didn't have a planeswalker that could win the game. Like, it didn't have a good proactive planeswalker, really. We had like Narset, and we have Moo can win the game, but Moo's like a small ball card. So this was our first mono blue, like, planeswalker finisher style card that we got for the cube, and it was a really, really big get. I happen to think that the art is pretty good too. So
yeah, it's a sweet one. The only thing I don't like about it is its name is like, is it Temporal Pilgrim? Yeah, there's another Teferi that's Teferi something Pilgrim, and then there's another Teferi that's like Teferi Temporal something. I was responsible for an update once where like some Commander Teferi snuck into our cube that we can't play, and I was like, that is not the one I meant to add. But yeah, sweet cards. Sea Shark, obviously, we'll get to that one in a little bit here. But I'm going to go ahead and move us into our main topic here, which again is about blue. And more a broad picture look at how blue is doing in Magic as a whole, and then narrowing into how blue is doing specifically in our cube. And the onus for this episode is us just noticing that blue was lagging behind in our cube, and then noticing that the reasons it was lagging behind are more wide scale. It's more about the way blue is just designed these days as opposed to historically designed, and we think that is lagging behind kind of in general, just in Magic as a whole. And we'll hopefully provide enough evidence to convince people of that. But we've seen it in our own cube where for a very long time blue was very frequently just last place. Our green decks were stomping everybody. That contributed a lot, but are still stomping people. Yes, green is very good. We could have just like the exact antithesis of this episode about how green is great instead of how blue is falling behind. But
we probably should, honestly, because I think there's a lot to discuss there. But anyway, this is the other side of that coin.
Yeah, although I think without getting too much into it, our green is good because it's catching up to what green traditionally does, whereas blue is lagging behind because of just how blue is not doing what it traditionally does.
Fair enough. I think there's a good discussion to be had there, but
for sure. Hey, if you're listening and you want to hear us talk about green instead of blue or whatever, just let us know.
Let's just do cutesy names, like cutesy episode titles for like every single color. Blue's got the blues. This was really easy.
Green.
It's easy being green.
It's easy being green. That's perfect. Okay, Chris, I'm going to go ahead and open this up to you here. You've got a couple red flags that have popped up in, I want to say, just modern Magic. This is really an issue, I would say, that has popped up within the last 5 years. This is not a historical issue, but go ahead and talk to me about some of these red flags that have come up that are kind of pinpointing why blue is just not, the king of what it used to be, the king of Magic, which I think it was for a very long time.
Oh, yeah. So I was watching Vintage Cube in the relatively recent past, and I saw Kenji Numathanami first pick Minskin Boo out of a Vintage Cube pack that had good Vintage Cube cards in it. Like, maybe not the best Vintage Cube cards. He didn't pick it out of a pack with Demonic Tutor in it or whatever. But it was like an okay Vintage Cube pack. And I watched a professional Magic player take a 2-color 4-drop threat first in Vintage Cube. 2 drafts later, similar pack, some pretty powerful cards that you could arguably first pick in Vintage Cube, and the man took Adeline. Like, not even Fable, Adeline. So between like Lelia, Adeline, Fable, and Minsk, like after that season was over, there were a bunch of popular streamers and, frankly, very skilled Magic players talking about how these 4 cards they considered to be like in the top like 30 Vintage Cube cards, which is fucking insane because they're 3 mana value threats outside of blue. And these are all recent prints, right? Like, that's not a coincidence either. And what that screams to me is that modern threats are just way better than modern effects, and this might even say that modern threats are better than a lot of traditionally really powerful effects from back when they used to print the good ones. I mean, this is in a counterspell tutor hard combo format with like potential turn 1 or turn 2 wins, and these cards are getting picked that early, which is bananas. And Teld, I'm actually really interested in your take on this point because you play a lot more Vintage Cube than I do. That's just something that I observed as a consumer of content, and it really kind of rocked my world.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I play a ton of Vintage Cube. I mostly play, they give you a free holiday pass or whatever. I'll play, usually 4 or 5 of them during the holidays, maybe 1 or 2 throughout the other cycles. So I play a little bit. What I would say is that they've made distinct changes, I think, to try and seed some of the other things to be doing other than just blue. But these cards are really good, and they Adeline particularly benefits from how powerful mono white is as a disruptive strategy, because Thalia is really the linchpin of that deck, but Adeline is the clock, right? So those 2 cards, you curve Thalia into Adeline will straight out win a lot of games of Vintage Cube, right? Because people play these greedy decks, and Thalia taxes everything. The quality of threats is just to the point there that, when you back it up by fast mana, it turns out saying, play a Mox, play my land, play a 3-drop, if you have a soul land especially, or play it's just better than holding up interaction most of the time. Yeah. Because if a single, it's what we see in the cube, right? If a single threat ever slips through, that threat snowballs out of control from a very low mana value on. So it's just magnified a million times when you're playing such a fast format.
Yeah, 100%. It's just like it's nice to see the diversity. Like, it's not like, oh, well, I can tell that there's 3 other people in blue, but I'm still supposed to be blue because it's Vintage Cube. That's nice for Vintage Cube, but it's having other ramifications for us that I'm not a huge fan of.
Yeah, as far as the threats go, the threats that we're talking about, cards like Lelia, Adeline, Fabled Mirror Breaker, Minskin Boo, Eska's Chariot, we could go on and on and on, all these things that have been printed over the last 3 or 4 years. They're cascading advantage once they're on board as well. I started playing Magic at a time where like Siege Rhino was the hotness, right? And Siege Rhino would come down, do the thing, and then it was a body. It didn't drain 3 every turn, and that was like the peak of like the most powerful thing you could be doing in Constructed at a time. So you could let that slip through, find an answer for it later on down the line, maybe take some damage. Now you let one of these creatures slip through, you let Minskin's Boo slip through your blue deck, you don't have an answer for it. And we're going to talk about, what blue's removal options are and why they just don't stack up against these cascading threats, these 3-for-1s like Chariot and Fabled the Mirror Breaker and stuff like that.
It's weird that it makes you long for a time when like the best threats in the game were like 1/2s that tutored for equipment and 1 mana 3/2 flyers, just flying wild economies.
Squadron Hawks were playable. I mean, I don't know if you guys consume this content or not, but I want to say Channel Fireball did this format where they basically took decks of the past and then paired them up against decks that won like recent PTs, and the recent PT decks always won against like Callblade and stuff like that. Decks that were traditionally the best of their time and stuff like that just did not hold a candle to modern decks. Like, modern decks just ran them over.
Card Market did one of those, with like Manguchi and Torolf and those people. And I will say there was like a prismatic black deck that looked absolutely terrible that like made it up to the top 4, top 8, something like that. It was just like the little deck that could.
Yeah. Constructed history is like full of decks that just don't compete with anything that's going on today. Even just an average deck today is better than like the best decks of the past for the most part.
Speaking of which,
yeah, you did some research behind the scenes about like PT deck winning decks and just how blue featured in them.
Now, granted, like these are individual PTs, right? But I still think that this is relevant information. The last Pioneer PT, the top 100 decks featured only 4 control decks, so that's 4% of the winner's metagame. And we're talking about a game that is just defined by archetypal pillars: aggro, mid-range, control, and combo. That's 4. 4% of the winner's metagame was represented by the control quote-unquote pillar, which is not actually there in this meta. And the top control deck placed 15th, with the second best placing 29th. The top 8 contained 6 combo decks. 6. which are the type of decks which flourish when control is bad, because there are no cops on the street saying, like, hey, you're going 120 miles an hour, you're going to jail now, right? When there are no cops, the sports cars come out, and that's when combo decks dominate formats. And I don't know that you can call Pioneer anything other than a combo deck dominated format when you've got a 6 combo deck top 8. I just don't know how else you can look at it. Notably, 0 control decks there.
Was this before or after like the bans? Was this like the experimental?
This was before the bans. So this was before the bans. But regardless, like, the fact of the matter is that, like, even when there are busted combo decks, like, counter spells answer things no matter what they are. If the counter spells are good and the card selection is good and the combo pieces or like the support pieces like Fable aren't like insanely pushed, control decks should be able to punish even quote-unquote good combo decks. And what this tells to me, or says to me, is that they just didn't have the weaponry to actually do that. There's kind of a similar story in the last standard PT. So 6 of the top 8 decks in that standard were Rakdos midrange. Now, those cards are all insane, right? Like, the cards in that deck are all insane. That's all well and good. But again, cheap counter magic counters literally anything if it's effective counter magic. And when the counter magic isn't effective and the card selection isn't effective, people get to run these crazy piles and where they just play the most powerful cards because the cops don't have guns. Like, there's no way to punish any of this, right? Again, just like combo really flourishes when control just does not have the tools to compete in the relevant selected card pool, battle cruiser flourishes when control is bad, right? Like, if there's nobody around to say, no, you can't have that, then it doesn't really make sense to play a low-to-the-ground aggressive deck when you can just put all of the best mid-cost threats in the entire format in your deck and not have them ever get countered. So having a Pioneer PT thoroughly and completely dominated by combo decks, followed almost immediately by a standard PT, dominated almost completely and totally by chunky mid-range decks, screams the same thing to me, which is that if you look over the last 10 years of Magic, they have not been printing the best blue effects in the world. And you can really, really see that when you look at the counterspell suite in our own personal cube, which is something that we'll get into a little bit later. So I want to be very clear, not trying to swerve outside of our lane here. I'm not a huge constructed player, but I think it's pretty fair to infer that if blue is no longer dominating Vintage Cube, and it's not really showing up outside of combo decks at the most competitive tiers of Pioneer and Standard Magic, that's probably a red flag that blue's power in modern prints is lagging behind the other colors. That's just my view of the situation. So what we're going to do now is we're going to hop into what I like to call the 4 horsemen of decline, which is like 4 little subtopics for, you know, where we're seeing this problem kind of pop up and what we think the reasons behind it are. And the first thing that I think we're going to talk about, and I think the thing that we're all probably instinctively as Magic players who've been around the block for a little while the most aware of, is threat power creep.
I mean, yeah, going back to the whole Siege Rhino thing, like, compare at any era before the last 5 years, like, the best maybe top 5 cards in Standard, and then compare them to like the average creep. Look at Blood Tithe Harvester. I mean, like, it baffles me that Blood Tithe Harvester, isn't that card like banned in Standard?
No, they did not ban Blood Tithe Harvester, but it was like one of the most played cards in Standard. It's completely ridiculous,
and it just like an uncommon. It's got a lot to do with fire design. I peg Throne of Eldraine as the set that like clearly defined power creep into the modern age.
That's the famous one, yeah.
Yeah, part of the reason is they wanted to start making commons and uncommons more exciting. They didn't want to just print vanilla creatures and have stuff out there.
And to their credit, they have succeeded at that,
yes,
right? Like,
yes.
I think a lot of more modern limited formats have been bangers. There have been a lot of really good ones.
Right, because you're not having to put in, you know, card number 20, 21, 22, and 23 as like vanilla creatures or 3 mana 3/3s with no abilities and stuff like that. They're going out of their way to print, you know, interest and effects on commons and uncommons, but what that means is you're now flooding the pool with more powerful cards. In addition to the, you know, powerful rares and mythics, you have powerful uncommons, and because the uncommons are doing what rares used to do back in the day, the rares and mythics are getting more powerful. You know, and a lot of that's intentional, and a lot of this, you know, just to piggyback off of blue not being great in a lot of different formats, blue is not the best color in Commander anymore either. I don't think anyone could argue it's the best color in Commander, and that's pretty big praise when you're saying, Commander, which is probably the most powerful format out there, a color that was dominant is no longer dominant because threats are actually like doing something. You can't play Draw Go. Draw Go is like dead. That is a dead archetype in the modern age, and part of it's because if the counter magic, which we'll talk about, is not excellent, it hasn't reached the height of what it was when blue was dominant. And then if you ever let a threat slip through your blue deck and you're not playing another color to deal with it, you're probably going to die to that threat. So yeah, threats are just way better than answers these days, even though the answers, I think, have caught back up. We're actually printing good removal in modern Magic again.
Yeah, I want to take a moment because I know some of our viewers probably weren't playing when Siege Rhino was in Standard, but I really cannot stress to you how dominant that card was, how much better it was as a threat than anything else you could be playing. Like, to the point that people were playing, if I remember right, Bring to Light, so that they could go get more of their Siege Rhinos. And that was a 4-mana 4/5 that drained 3 on ETB. That was like the menace of Standard. That was the big threat. Siege Rhino, I don't want to go on too hot of a take, but like, would that card even be playable in Standard at this point?
No, it's on Arena. It was printed in an anthology, and it sees no play. And granted, it's only playable in Historic or Alchemy or something like that. But again, that goes back to Siege Rhino is just a 1-for-1 with a good ETB that does a little bit of a life swing, whereas cards now like Fabled Mirror Breaker and Esca's Chariot can't be cleanly answered with one card. So if you're the blue deck and you can't counter it, what are you going to do? Unsummon the Kiki Jiki token and then unsummon the Fable with the Mirror Breaker? Like, you got to counter it, or if you don't counter it, it lands and then it gets the value. And even if you do find a really dinky answer like a Witness Protection or something, they already got the value out of the card. It's really tough for blue to keep up with threats because the threats are so good and the counter spells aren't good enough to keep up with them.
Let's have some fun. So for the people at home, if you're interested in Historic Cube, maybe you're not really familiar with Siege Rhino, I'm going to read Siege Rhino, and then we're going to go around the table, and we're all going to talk about the threat that immediately springs to mind when we think about like the past 5 years of creep threat or power creep around threats, and let you decide whether or not the delta in power seems reasonable. So Siege Rhino was a 4-mana Abzan, 1 white, black, green, so 4 mana for a 4/5 trample. When it ETBs, you drain your opponent for 3. This is a 3-color card. 4/5, 4 cost, drains your opponent for 3. This was the dominant threat in Standard. If you play Standard and you're not laughing right now, then I don't think you know what's funny, because that's pretty fucking hilarious. Why don't you guys call out like a threat from today that to compare to Siege Rhino? What comes to mind off the top of your head about like, holy shit, I can't believe they printed this card?
Well, I mean, the first card that comes to mind is Vampire Sovereign, because it's an uncommon that no one would ever play. That's arguably better than Siege Rhino, but has the same exact ability. We played in our Peasant Cube, and it's like great there, but whatever. I don't know, Esca's Chariot, because that's one we had to remove from our cube for being too good. Also a 4-mana card, a single color, mind you.
Single pip.
Straight up 3-for-1 when it enters the battlefield. So, and it's across 2 different types of permanents, so you can't catch it all with a sweeper. Like, you need very specific answers to deal with it with one card.
Can I introduce you to our good friend Shoulder the Apocalypse? It is also a 4-mana card that only requires black mana, is also a 4/5, but wins the game.
Yeah.
So it does have an ETB, which when it first came out, a lot of people, myself included, kind of wondered just how good it would be because it didn't have immediate value. But obviously, like, if you untap with Children, or even if it just goes your opponent's turn, like, it starts generating so much pressure on the game that it is completely warps the game around itself. Like, if you've played Standard recently, most games end up revolving around, like, okay, I'm in an okay spot, hope opponent doesn't have Children. And like, if they do, these black mirrors that make up like 35% of the metagame are, just Children mirrors, right? They're just who sticks Children wins the game. And that's what we're getting with our 4-mana drains these days.
R&D is doing great, guys. They're doing great.
It's worth noting with Shieldred too, specifically, the comparison to Siege Rhino is they're both 4/5s for 4. Sure, Shieldred is a mythic, which does matter. You get to push it a little bit more. But both 4-mana 4/5s, one of them's a 3-color card, one of them's a 1-color card, and they have arguably the same effect. Like, if you get one turn cycle, Shieldred has roughly the same effect that Siege Rhino did, right? But because now you're taking powerful effects that we're used to and you're putting them on monocolored cards, that also means we get to push the gold cards even further. I mean, this is my least favorite trend, is just putting gigantic stats on gold cards. But if you played Limited in the last couple of years, look at cards like, Mavrin and Galta, which is a 7-mana 12/12 with trample or something and an attack trigger that happens right away.
Hided Getsu and Kairi.
Yeah, it just 5/4 flyer for 5. The one that what's the spider? Shelob? 8/8 for 4 black-green. Like, that's not even hard to cast. Like, they've now...
And don't forget Atraxa to top as the big giant cherry on this whole Threat Sunday we're making.
Like, you can print monocolored cards that are super powerful, but gold cards need to be better than monocolored cards, by nature, to incentivize you to play them. So the gold cards are more powerful, and what that just means is all of the creatures are just super powerful now, but they're not given that same... Like, they're not matching it with counter spells. Chris loves Make Disappear, but like that's what you're playing in Standard if you want to try and counter something. Make Disappear, or like you better have some Disdainful Strokes. Like you don't have counter spell. You're hoping to slip a Disdainful Stroke or a Make Disappear on something, and if you don't have it at the right time, or God forbid you're on the draw, GG. And
then your opponent plays a Misery Shadow, and you stare longingly at your Disdainful Stroke, wondering where you made a mistake.
Could even mention a card like I always want to say Welcome in Vampire. It's the Wedding Announcement, not Wedding Invitation. Wedding Announcement. Yeah. If that slips through the cracks, then which doesn't even get got by like the Essence Scatters of the world and stuff like that. Like you've got to deal with all these 1/1s and an Anthem for 3 mana. It's just this cascading advantage that's really hard to keep up with. But I mean, just driving home 100%. The point that threats are really, really good in Modern Magic, and Blue's interaction to those threats, it's not keeping up.
Yeah, I just want to reinforce something that you just, Tim, said. Like, I don't even really think like I need to do like my threat that demonstrates this concept. I think people get it. I really want to highlight what Tim has said, which is if you are playing a heavily blue deck now, never like really in history, if you're not playing a tempo deck, do you want to be mono blue? Like, mono blue control is on the thing, right? So let's assume you're playing a second color for removal. Like, you've got some removal, fine, whatever. But the problem is, as Tim mentioned, it used to be once upon a time, like with a card like Siege Rhino, one of the hallmarks of being an extremely skilled control player was deciding what you could let resolve and what absolutely could not resolve, because you couldn't counter everything. That was like a matter of well-established fact, right? In sort of the theory crafting around control. Like, you cannot afford to counter everything. You have to do something eventually. So you got to pick your spots where you can let something resolve so you can implement your own game plan. We live in a world today with all this threat power creep where, again, like Tim said, it really feels like if you let anything that costs 2 or more mana stick, then you are in a world of really serious snowbally trouble. And that's just an issue that's present in modern day Magic design that is really giving it to the blue decks. So we'll see where that goes from here. But yeah, I agree. I think we're beating this particular horseman a little dead. But I just wanted to emphasize letting things resolve today in modern Magic is terrifying in a way that it was not once upon a time where you could be a little bit more choosy.
Right.
I mean, kind of getting to your point, I mean, we could move on to the next one, right? I mean, you start talking about 3-mana threats, and meanwhile, Blue has 3-mana card draw spells, so there's that.
Yeah, so let's go on to the second horseman. Let's call this one Famine. Talk to me about effect stagnation, the stagnation of Blue's just general suite of effects.
So I'll just make a couple quick notes and then hand it back over to you guys, because I feel like you probably have more interesting things to say on this particular topic than I do. But what I mean by stagnation is, like, blue effects, they're not really getting any better. A Doomblade's a Doomblade's a Doomblade. And in fact, in the case of blue, like an Opt is a Consider is a whatever. Like, we've had these effects forever. The creatures are just getting, progressively better, but these effects are the same that they've always been, which necessarily means that by extension, like, they're kind of decreasing in relative power, right? And in fact, in the case of blue, like, counter magic it hasn't stagnated, it's gotten actively worse. The vast majority of modern counter spells are goofy things like counter target artifact or creature unless its opponent pays 4, or counter target spell that costs 2 or less or whatever, they tend to be highly conditional, which means that your control deck has to pack a variety of them, and not all of them even answer the thing that needs to get answered right now.
Yeah, I mean, and it's kind of building off your point, because they've made counterspells more conditional, and they're less efficient than they used to be. Sort of a spot where you get punished more for making mistakes with blue decks than you do other colors of interaction, right? And this isn't some sort of, control players need big brains sort of argument. It's more just like a necessity, right? Is that if your interaction only works before the card is on the table, then if you make a choice of like to stick a threat instead of holding up interaction, and then that threat that kills you slips through, you don't really have a good way natively in color to deal with it. And that's just becoming more and more noticeable as they've pushed the punishment level up. And then there's the flip side of that is like in blue, counterspells are a lot better when you're ahead. And the thing is you have to stick a threat to get ahead. So you have to pick a spot where you can be like, okay, I'm going to let something through. I don't know what it is, and just hope it doesn't kill me. And so, it used to be, like you said, the mark of a good blue player was knowing what you could counter and what you couldn't. And I think now it's becoming like, when can I find the turn to slip a card to get a clock into play?
Exactly.
It's worth noting, like, we all know nobody out there is playing mono blue. You supplement what blue is doing with the things that, blue is weak against, right? If you can't if you can't deal with your opponent's 2-drops and 3-drops, you play like the black removal and stuff like that, and you're blue-black, but then you're just the black deck that has a couple blue cards. Like, we're talking about blue as the base of like a deck that you're happy to play, and you want to play blue. You don't want it to be just like a tertiary part of your deck out of necessity or something like that.
Also, to my point, like if your removal suite is like 6 Doom Blades or 6 Lightning Bolts, right? Versus 3 counter spells and 3 lightning bolts, suddenly you're like much less likely to have the hard removal for the thing that slipped through in the first place.
Yeah, well, and not to mention the fact that like there are cards like you brought up Esca's Chariot before, and we surprisingly haven't talked a ton about Fable, but Fable is like equally egregious. If I don't counter that, yeah, I may be paired with white or black or red in my deck, but like I can't clean those up for less than 2 cards. And in fact, for Esca's Chariot, sometimes you can't even really clean it up at all. Like, can we talk for a second about the fact that Kolagon's command does not clean Esca's Chariot up? Like, it is the famous 2-for-1 card, and your opponent is left with a 2/2 after you Kolagon's command them, and they paid a 4 mana for a single pip threat. Kolagon's command doesn't clean that up. So you can supplement with black, white, red if you're going to play control. You have to. Actually, I think this is probably the best way to articulate it. Some of these threats you literally cannot deal with in a resource-efficient manner unless you counter them, and the counter spells are not as good as they used to be. So, like, what exactly are you supposed to do?
Yeah, you have to play a different color, but then it's like, well, that's the good color, not the blue cards, Which blue's fine as a support thing, I guess. But even so, if you look at these PT decks that Chris was talking about, like they're playing blue for Make Disappear and Disdainful Stroke in the sideboard, and then the rest of the deck is the main like Grixis, like red black shell or whatever they're actually playing. So blue is not carrying the weight. Blue might add something to another strategy, but whatever the other colors are, that's the part that's carrying.
So, like, mono blue decks do appear in Constructed. I think there's one right now. But they tend to be, like, stick a Haughty Djinn and play a bunch of cheap counter magic, right? It almost doesn't matter what the counter magic is because you're just trying to kill your opponent fast and get underneath of them. I'm fine with blue being, outside of a mono blue tempo deck, being, like, the color that's offering the card selection, that's offering the counters, that's offering some of the better threats, but isn't necessarily the whole deck. I'm totally fine with that. The problem is that, like, in modern Constructed, people aren't choosing blue as a support color for their deck because the counters are so bad that, like, what support are you really offering? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's tough to be blue these days.
Yeah, because it used to be Blue's role was to generate card advantage for you, and more recent Magic sets have kind of pushed away from that. I think that's actually something we plan to talk about.
Well, yeah, let's talk about Horseman number 3 here. The dilution of the color pie in terms of blue. So just to kind of frame this, the color pie is like one of Magic's biggest assets, right? And it kind of has this philosophy that each color should be the best at doing one or two things, right? Obviously, it's good at doing a lot of different things. But blue, let me ask you, gentlemen, when you think of blue and the color pie, what is it that blue is supposed to be the best at traditionally?
Drawing cards.
Card draw.
I think Blue's other advantage is it's supposed to be very good at generating and leveraging tempo.
Sure. Yeah. Tempo. Right. Whatever that means. Whatever tempo means. Blue's very good at that. But counter magic is also on that list. But I think Chris hits the nail on the head. Card advantage. Right. It is just a fact of Magic that blue is supposed to be the best color, card advantage color, and I would venture to say that's not true anymore. Because blue has the best raw card advantage. It has the best like mana to cards drawn ratio when you look at like the 4 mana draw twos and stuff like that. But it doesn't have the best competitive card advantage because the other colors now have plenty of card advantage stapled onto their threats or stapled onto whatever else they're doing, which we can talk about all the different threats that generate card advantage, but we've already talked about a bunch of those already. So I think that's a problem for the color pie because if blue is no longer the best at drawing cards, and we can talk about white encroaching on blue's counterspell territory with a reprieve here. If blue's no longer the best at drawing cards and it's sharing the counterspell part of the color pie with another color, which is a little bit of a stretch, then what is blue good at, Like, look right. At card advantage in other colors. And as much as some people like to rag on the Commander community, you can thank them for white having card advantage now. Like, it is because of Commander that white decks have card advantage, and it's good card advantage. Your Welcome in Vampires, your Wedding Announcements, your cantrip creatures like Spirited Companion, which are just better in white than they're ever going to be in blue and stuff like that. White has
Sarah Paragon is like one of my favorite white prints in the last couple of years.
Exactly, yeah, like a good white threat that gives you cards. Green threats, God forbid, we'll talk about the green threats that give you just all the cards in the world. Red has like impulse attached to every single card now, and black has always had card advantage, but like the kind of you're going to lose a little bit of life and you're going to get card advantage, or the recursive kind of stuff. So every color can do card advantage while just playing to the board, or doing it very efficiently, whereas blue is still stuck in that space where it's trying to resolve a 4 mana draw 2. But if you have to counter everything your opponent does, when are you ever getting the space to cast those 4 mana draw 2s and stuff like that? So
we've actually discussed that a little bit, right? Where Memory Deluge is just not the card that you expect it to be most of the time, to the point that I actually wonder if we recently put Behold the Multiverse in, and I wonder if it's going to end up playing out better just because you can break the mana cost up into 2 payments of 2, which is substantially easier than having 4 to spend in one turn.
We'll expand on that for a second, because Memory Deluge is a great card. It is a fantastic draw spell. It's one of the best 4 mana draw 2s out there. It has flashback, it comes back, it basically shores up the late game. But like, why do you say it's not the card you want it to be, even though on face value, like, it's about as good as a draw spell is going to get at that slot?
Yeah, I mean, it is probably the best at 4 mana. It's probably as good as it gets. But when I played that and my opponent played a Mole Slayer, and it just kills me. Like, when do you resolve Memory Deluge? The most effective control deck I've personally played in the recent memory was, first of all, it's a Sunfell deck, so I do have to grant that card was completely busted and won me a number of games. But almost every card in my deck cost like either 2 mana, or it was some sort of weird power outlier like Quintorius that just took over the game if it resolved.
Yeah, no, I hear you 100%. And actually, like, I kind of have my own example of this. So I was basically forced at one point to hold up Counter Magic and hold up Memory Deluge because, like, I needed to find a Wrath, but, like, I really didn't want to counter what they were going to play, right? But I was going to do it if I absolutely had to because I was going to die. But, like, what I really wanted to do was dig for a Wrath. And I was like, you know what? If it's a good creature, I won't have to counter it because, like, I'm basically like, I need to find a Wrath. I'm pretty sure I need to find a Wrath here. So I'm just going to let it resolve unless it's something that I can't Wrath away. And then I know this card keeps coming up. But then my opponent played Essica's Chariot, and I was like, I literally have to counter that because even if I draw into my Wrath, I can't actually Wrath away the Chariot. Like, I can Wrath away all the creatures that can crew it, but then they're just going to play another creature and they're going to crew it and they're going to kill me. Like, I can't count the number of times that I've like passed and been like, okay, as long as they don't cast Essica's Chariot, I'm fine.
Yeah.
And then that's exactly what they cast, you know what I mean? Or, you hold up mana and you're like, cool, I'm in the control deck, I'm in control of the game, unless they cast either Fable or Essica's Chariot because I'm holding an Essence Scatter, and then that's exactly what they do and the game is just over on the spot.
So if you're a new player to the community and you're like, man, Eskashir's a good card. Why is it not in this cube?
It's because it's a really good card.
Yeah, if the best cards you can think of in the card pool aren't in the cube, that's intentional. But
it's not because we missed them, I promise.
We missed them originally, but we don't talk about that. You see the through line here, right? Like the spectrum of threats are better. You have to be able to counter the threats. Since you are kind of priced into countering the threats, you don't have time to cast your card draw spells. Therefore, the card draw spells get weaker. Therefore, blue's dominance or monopoly on card advantage is no longer true because the other colors can do that thing without having that dilemma. They just play their creatures and generate virtual card advantage. So blue is just falling down, right?
If you're a pretty heavy constructed player, in the cube, that the 7 mana function of Memory Deluge might as well not exist in like half your games. You constructed, you plan to flash back your Memory Deluge like every single game. That's the game plan. It just doesn't play out like that in cube very often.
It's also worth noting, like some people might respond to everything we're saying by saying, well, why don't you just let the solution be blue plays threats as well? And blue threats aren't as good as the other colors threats, so you don't really shift there, and you just don't have the support for like blue threat dense decks. You kind of have to play into blue's strengths, which is kind of an oxymoron when we're talking about their strengths just not being as strong as they traditionally have been.
And then they started giving green cantrips. I know
yeah,
Chris has
and
some feelings on this.
Which have actually been the green I really like the green cantrips, but I wanted to harken back actually to the threat power creep topic real quick, based on something that Tim just said. That the least threat dense color is going to benefit the least from threat power creep, and almost all of the power creep in Modern Magic is concentrated into the threats. So that necessarily means that blue is at the table getting the smallest bowl of porridge, right? The color that plays the fewest creatures is going to suffer in a world where all of the design power is being pumped into creatures. The way that I like to think of it is, once upon a time, red made the best swords, and blue made the best shields, and that was fine. And then one day, red invented guns, and they might not be the world's best. Makes the best shields, but shields suck in a world full of guns. That's sort of the way that I view this problem, is like we're still making the same defensive gear in an environment where the weapons have just gotten substantially stronger.
Yeah. Don't bring a shield to a gunfight.
Do not bring a shield to a gunfight. Some knights learned the hard way on the plains of France that was not a good idea.
Well, we have talked at length about threats getting better, but just to wrap up that point, what in holy hell is a mole slayer?
So I like to say, with our problems combined, I am Captain Mole Slayer, and that is the culmination of all of these problems. So a mole slayer is exactly what it sounds like. I think we're all, if you're even a reasonably dedicated Magic player, we're all familiar with the kind of mole drifter Baneslayer dichotomy that's been sort of at the center of discussions about creatures, for what feels like since time immemorial at this point. And I think we've really entered territory now. And I'm not talking about like limited cards. I'm talking about like constructed power level cards, where there are cards where calling them a Baneslayer or a Mole Drifter is like a fruitless exercise because they're both. So a Mole Slayer is obviously a Mole Slayer, or a Mole Drifter Baneslayer hybrid, and the example that I want to talk about is Vorinclex. Now,
can you specify which of Vorinclex's 47 prints you're talking about?
Yeah, so sorry, it is actually just straight up, just Vorinclex.
March of the Machines Vorinclex, right?
March of the Machines Vorinclex, right. So let me go ahead and pull this sucker up so I make sure, so I don't forget any of the text on it. Okay, so Vorinclex is a 5-mana 6/6 trample reach. When it ETBs, you search your library for up to 2 forest cards, notably not basics, so you can go get utility forests, you can go get all kinds of different fun stuff, triomes, reveal them, put them into your hand, then shuffle. Then for 8 mana, no other conditions, just 8 mana, you exile it, return it to the battlefield, transform under its owner's control as a saga. You can only activate it as a sorcery.
We don't have to read that saga, do we?
No, I'm not. Basically, it rips through your deck, it dumps a bunch of threats onto the battlefield from the cards that it milled, and then it makes 1,000,000 +1/+1 counters and just wins the game.
And then it turns back into Vorinclex again.
Doesn't it also do some like fighting stuff, or is it just flip back
Yes,
into
it
Vorinclex?
does. Yeah, it does that too. So
wraps your opponent's more is Plague Wind.
It's basically it's Plague Wind that mills you, puts a bunch of creatures on the battlefield. Plague Winds your opponent, then makes everything huge, or in the other order. It doesn't matter. Let's just call
and
it.
If you didn't win there, you get to draw 2 more forests and have a 6/6 reach trigger.
So let's just say 8 mana win the game. Let's just call it 8 mana win the game. So for 5 mana, I'm getting a 6/6 trample reach that drew 2 cards, both of which help me get to the 8 mana that I need to just win the game on the spot. So if my 6/6 trample for 5 doesn't beat you to death, if you don't remove it, like let's say we're in some crazy board stall situation or something that I'm having difficulty actually imagining, but in the event that like you can't kill me with your Vorinclex, but I can't deal with the Vorinclex, like I'm just sitting there waiting for you to clock me and basically just flip this thing and win. This to me is a classic example, or I wouldn't say classic because we're just now talking about Mole Slayers, but like this is like an archetypal Mole Slayer to me. Like this card will absolutely murder your face, so you cannot let it resolve, right? But you also don't really feel great about Doomblading it because, yeah, you're getting a tempo advantage, but, like, they're only lands, and I get that. But, like, my opponent drew 2 cards. That's what they did.
Your opponent also played this on turn 3, so, like, drawing lands is still a relevant portion of the game.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, even if you have plenty of lands, like, in a 40-card format like Cube, like, pulling 2 lands out of your deck is meaningful thinning, especially if you get to basically decide what those lands are. You know, if I'm playing this in a Jund deck and I just, like, didn't find my black source yet for some reason, like, I can go get my Overgrown Tomb. Like, this card does all kinds of powerful things, and, like, this card would be really strong even if it didn't draw the 2 forests, but it just does.
Yeah. We were playing Elder Gargaroth for a very long time, and it was kind of the only card of this design, and now we get a bunch of things like this that are 5 mana 6/6s with trample and a bunch of extra upside, and it was fine when it was 1 card. But when your green section in a cube, for example, is Vorinclex, Defiler of Vigor, Elder Gargaroth, like, it starts to become a little bit redundant that all these green cards are winning the game and also just drawing cards while winning the game. So in our cube, we even cut back to, like, Battle Mammoth, which is still just, like, a perfectly fine card. Like, it's clearly not as good as some of these other, you know, Mole Slayers, but
does the same thing in a good portion of your games.
Yeah, you're sacrificing power and still ending up with just a perfectly good to reasonable threat. So there are a lot of designs that are like pushed power and toughness, plus you're getting some sort of virtual card advantage off of it.
Trust me when I say this, because we draft this cube almost every single week. We get a lot of reps in. We get to watch a lot of games. When you're playing a control deck into a green deck that has cards like this that draw cards, you spend the first portion of the game 1-for-1ing your opponent with like counter spells and removal and stuff like you're supposed to do, and then at turn 5 you look at your hand and you're holding 3 cards and your green opponent is somehow still holding 5, and at that point you're fucked, because you're at the point in the game where literally at that mana value anything that resolves that you can't answer will kill you, and when their creatures are just drawing lands and creatures and more cards and stuff, if you can't 1-for-1 your green opponent out of the game, when your Doomblade sucks against your opponent's Baneslayer, but your counter spells are also not good, that's really a hard spot to be in.
So don't draft blue, is that what you're saying, Chris?
No, I'm not saying that, because luckily things do appear to be getting ever so slightly better.
That is kind of our take on blue as it stands just in general Magic. Let's go ahead and start talking about how blue is performing in our cube. And I kicked off the episode by saying blue is, I mean, to put it in layman's terms, blue is our worst color right now. It has certainly propped itself back up over the course of, let's say, the last month and a half, 2 months, due to just a couple new additions. We did have to make some concessions in the cube, but talk to me about blue's place in the cube right now, and this is in the historic cube environment. So for listeners who aren't super familiar with that, we do all of our cubing on Arena, which is the historic card pool, and blue has its own problems there. And I will say again, we had to make concessions just to prop blue up a little bit. We had to cut some of the traditionally best cards that were good against blue because blue just didn't have answers to deal with them. So we're playing like just a mass number of like really janky counter spells just to ensure that blue decks have the density of answers for things. We had to cut some really powerful cards like Den of the Bugbear, Lair of the Hydra, because blue was like, I don't know how to deal with that. Hope I'm playing a different color. So let's go ahead and talk about the impact of everything we've been talking about on our cube environment.
So unfortunately, I do have to say, I think blue is probably still the clear worst color in our cube. even with these concessions. That being said, I mean, I will say I'm also a giant blue-white stan. I think blue-white specifically is a pretty powerful color combination with a wide variety of playable decks that are all, and it's when you see the blue decks 3-0, it's usually off the back of being some sort of blue-white shell, whether that be Soul Herder, some sort of like mid-rangey tempo sort of deck, or a true control deck.
Yeah, totally. I do want to say this. If you are a historic cube designer, right? If you're out there, you're designing an arena cube, all hope is not lost. I'm not telling you play a 4-color cube. Don't do that. Most of the discussion in this episode is the result of a lot of experience. And I'm not trying to say that in an arrogant way. Just 3 years of repeated play testing. We've known that these issues existed for some time, or we knew that blue was struggling, but it took us a little while to figure out all of the mechanics and the underlying reasons for why. Right, and then we started kind of having our aha moments once we became more experienced cube designers than we were when we started out. So if you're just starting out designing a historic cube, I'm not saying you have to throw your hands up and just acknowledge that blue is going to be your worst color. There's a couple of things that you can do. Some of the changes that we made. The Mole Slayer cards that we've been talking about that control decks just really just have a horrible, horrible time with, and also in general just tend to be so absurdly powerful that they swing games that otherwise could not have been won and stuff like that. You don't have to play Lelia. You don't have to play Essica's Chariot. If you have a player in your group who really likes to play blue control and they stop because they're tired of losing to Fable and cards like that it feels like they just never had an opportunity to beat, cut those cards. That's what we did. There's plenty of other powerful red and green cards for you to play that are fun to play with that aren't nearly as absurd. That's thing number one. Thing number two, and this has been really effective for us, is skew your threats in favor of creatures pretty heavily. Now, that's going to happen naturally anyway in the historic card pool. If you've ever played Modern Cube, it's exactly the same way. It's a very creature-centric environment because Magic has been a very creature-centric game for the past decade plus. That's just kind of the nature of design. Nothing wrong with that. I enjoy playing with creatures, right? If you're thinking about putting an enchantment or an artifact into your cube for 3 mana in a color whose purpose is to be a threat and win the game, maybe consider playing a creature instead. And the reason that I say that is they print a number of counter spells that are very effective against creatures and not really effective or effective at all in the case of Essence Scatter against anything else. And when you bias your threats in your other colors towards creatures, that makes your conditional cards, like your Essence Scatters and your Rejects, which is basically like Mana Leak for creatures and planeswalkers, or Exclude, which is not a good card in an environment where the threats are, this is a theoretical environment, like a third creatures, third enchantments, and third artifacts. That's probably not out there, right? But when Exclude can miss a really good percentage of the time, it's not a good card, right? But if your blue deck is really struggling to find all the free 2-for-1s that the other colors are getting, struggling to answer the threats efficiently, 3 mana doesn't feel good to counter a thing, whatever. When you exclude a 3 mana creature and you draw a card, that is actually a good play, right? You've managed to maintain the cards in your grip, you've countered a thing, whatever, that feels great. So take some of the cards in blue that are the most powerful when they actually function, which is to say a lot of blue counters that target creatures specifically, and then bias yourself towards creatures, and that's going to raise blue stock. So that's one of the other changes that we've made.
I also think I want to try to change the equation. I know it's kind of, we've mentioned it before as kind of a filler level counter, but I actually think in the context of the way decks play out, that card's actually a real overperformer. A lot of the really good threats are like red 4 to 6 drops are really powerful, and that card catches those. And then it also protects your threats, which a lot of the other counter spells can't do, right? Most removal is 1 to 2 mana, and change the equation catches that on turn 15 when your Make Disappear doesn't.
Change the equation is the 1 in a blue counter any card with mana value 2 or less, or counter a green or red card with mana value 6 or less, which for us,
correct,
it just seems like the type of card we would never put in our cube because it screams color hoser. But when you consider red and green are our best colors and blue is our worst color, it kind of makes sense. And it also just kind of like does the thing, you know, it was proposed as a solution to a potential problem, and it turns out the card's like just fine. But we wouldn't be playing it if everything was balanced in a perfect world, because it's just not an ideal card. Like all these Quench variants and stuff like that, they're not ideal cards, but you know they're what we play to try and bolster blue. Sure. And then on the other end, you have to You don't have to cut. Let me ask you this. This has come up from a lot of recent limited sets where they're with 17 lands and stuff like that. People always know what the worst color is, and sometimes it's very obvious that one color is just way worse than the rest. Case in point, green from Lord of the Rings is significantly worse than the other colors. And I've heard on like limited resources and from a couple other people like LSV say balance isn't as important as fun, right? Is it fine to just have a color that's not as good as the others and still just play the best cards for those other colors and just that's kind of the expectation coming in?
I think it depends on how much worse your worst color is.
Exactly.
Well, let's say it's playable. Like, let's say it's a consistent like 1-2-2-1, but basically is impossible to 3-0 with unless you're lucky.
Yeah, so like using some recent sets, like if it's something like Mom, where the blue and black were significantly better than everything else, but like all the colors were playable, that's probably fine. I think if you reach where you get like one where blue is just actually kind of unplayable outside of one very narrow color combination, like one specific archetype, and even that's like you don't want to be there because you have to be in that deck exactly. I think that's where you've reached some serious issues. Though the line's probably somewhere between those two, but I don't think it's. I think there always has to be a worse color, right? You can't have you're never going to hit a perfect balance.
I don't think that the statement that balance is more or fun is more important than balance actually means anything. I think that's I think it's a completely empty statement because it assumes that what we're discussing is like mutually exclusive.
It doesn't also assume that fun is subjective. Like it's
yeah, and that's a whole other that's a whole other kettle of fish. But I'll put it to you this way. In the example that you gave, where being heavily based in a specific color means that even though you're a good player, it is likely that you are going to want to, I think that's unacceptable. Especially if you're designing a cube and you have spiky players, and I don't play with people who are like obnoxious, like table flipper spikes, like those people should be rounded up and sent somewhere. But
like me and Theo are trying to win every week.
Yeah, people who play to win and like take a lot of pride in the fact that their skill at Magic, translates into being really effective at a game that they love and enjoy. Like, I don't want a color, and I don't think that blue is this, by the way. We have seen blue 3-0s recently, and we're going to talk about signs of hope here in a minute, right? Because blue is definitely getting better, partially because some of the changes that we made, partially because I think they've maybe finally started to realize, holy shit, like we've been just pouring sugar on all of the other colors, and blue's been sitting in the corner crying. I think they're finally starting to wrap their heads around that, it would appear. But like, I wouldn't want to design a cube where there's a color that Theo or Teld would straight up be like, I'm not drafting that because I know I literally can't 3-0 with it. Mm-hmm. Like, I can't win. If you have a base color in your cube where the person who is drafting it is like, well, I guess I'll phone it in because I'm definitely not going all the way, then you have a design problem.
I never feel like that. Like we had that sweet blue-black deck we drafted a few weeks ago that almost went all the way, and that was like a straight blue-black tempo deck that was completely out of left field. So like I think there's definitely still some interesting places to draft blue in the cube, and I think if you are drafting it, you're playing the worst color, but also your things aren't that bad. We've been talking about individual problems blue as a color has like on a meta basis, but on a any given night blue can still 3-0.
One of the reasons I think this is so important, and I brought it up, and we're doing this whole episode, is sometimes you're a new drafter and you don't know you're drafting the worst color. And I think it's very important as a cube curator to make sure you're not tricking people or supporting an archetype that's known to be just straight up bad. So that's why balance is so important in a cube environment. You can get away with it in a limited environment, but if you sit down in a cube, your expectation is that it's been curated so that whatever color pair or deck or archetype you end up in is at least viable. And as the cube curators, we find that it's important to balance things out, and sometimes that means sacrificing from the top end and playing janky cards like Essence, Scatter, and Reject, which in an ideal world we probably wouldn't play. We'd rather have better counter magic. But I wanted to pose that question because it's come up in a lot of recent limited sets, and I think there's a completely different mindset that needs to go into curating a cube that you expect strangers to play with and stuff like that.
I'll go this far. I think I'm going to say something absolutist and probably a little bit over the top. If you have a color or color combination in your cube where the person drafting it feels defeated before they played their first game, then you didn't design a good cube. Straight up. Like, it's like a limited set where it's like, I'm in the green. It's Lord of the Rings. I'm in the green seat. I know I'm supposed to be green, and I already feel like dog shit and want to go home. Your design is not good. Revisit the drawing board.
Someone has to draft that. In a pot of 8, someone has to be in that, you know?
Or force a terrible version of something that someone else is already drafting, because that's still better than being green.
Right, and then you have 2 other people who just have bad versions of the same deck.
Yeah, it causes cascading problems. It's just not good.
Balance is important. This stuff is important. It is very important to make sure your weakest color, like you don't want to have a weakest color, but if you do have a weakest color, you probably should take steps to make it a viable thing in your cube. But thankfully, you know, blue is not so weak. Like it's not unplayable in our cube, and a lot of stuff that we've gotten recently has bolstered it up, as I mentioned at the top of the episode. So Teld, why don't you go and talk to us about some of the newer blue additions that we've gotten over the course of like the last 6 months that are actually adding a lot to blue's win percentage here.
Yeah, so when I draft blue, there's kind of 2 categories of cards for threats that I really like. The first is, and these are relatively new, is we finally got Vendilion Click and Snapcaster Mage on the client, along with Mom Gave Us Fairy Mastermind. All these cards have flash, and blue creatures are really good if they have flash, because all of that stuff I talked about needing to make decisions and getting punished for it goes away. You know, if I pass and I've got my terrible counterspell Make Disappear and my Fairy Mastermind ready to go, but my opponent doesn't play a card I need to counter, or they don't play anything at all, I can just flash in my Fairy Mastermind, and now I've got my clock to leverage my my counterspell. So Fairy Mastermind, for those who haven't played it, it's 1 in a blue for a 2/1 flash flyer, and if your opponent draws their second card in the turn that isn't in their draw step, then you get to draw a card. It has an activated ability that costs 1,000,000 mana that makes both players draw a card, which occasionally comes up, but very rarely. Anyways, the whole point of that is you're getting a cheap flyer into play. Now, the downside of these cards like Click and Snapcaster Mage, is they're not very good threats. You know, Click and Fairy Mastermind are okay, but Snapcaster Mage is an ambush viper. You know, you're not talking about the fastest clock, the most disruptive or snowbally cards, but they do reduce that tension, so I like those. The other ones are the ones I really, really like. Oh, I do need to throw out Torrential Gearhulk is the king of the flash creatures. That's just like the one you really want. Brazen Borrower is also fantastic. I probably should have led with those instead of some of the other ones, but there's a number of them now. The other ones are the 4 toughness creatures at 3 mana. And so there's Baby Shark, Chromos Sea Shark, and then there's the other one, which is Celadine and of Sea and Sky. I believe I said that right. And if you haven't played with this card, I understand why. It's a Modern Horizon card, so we know it's broken. So 1 blue for a 3/4 Merfolk, and it has a bunch of text on it about giving Merfolk ward and being indestructible and stuff. We don't actually care about that. The real trick on this card is buried in the middle of the card for some reason. But when you attack with your 3 mana 3/4, you get to draw a card, which is awesome. Yep. It leverages a lot of things that blue's able to do pretty well, especially when paired with like black. But blue is pretty good at the whole tempo game. So a lot of times you can play Sylvan on turn 3 and then leverage your removal spells in order to get a draw off and go into your next turn drawing another card, right? And if you get that snowball going, you can start drawing enough cards that you outpace your opponent's threats and are able to really take over the game. The other thing is both of these cards, we talked a little bit about how much I like Seed Shark earlier, and all those things about it are great. The 4 toughness makes it a great blocker. It's a fine attacker. It generates a ton of value. But the other thing these 2 cards have in common is in your control decks, they're the only way you can really leverage going into turn 4 wrathing. So if you're gonna wrath on turn 4, Selvin can attack and draw a card, so at least replace itself, which isn't the best thing ever, but it is pretty good. It's better than a lot of the other 3-drops would be able to do if you just had them in play. And then obviously Sea Shark is actively really good when you do that. There's also Kefnet, which is another card that I'm not super fond of, but that fact that it's a 4/5 is just super relevant. The blue creatures finally getting good stat lines is a really, really big deal. And that's really wrapped up in Sea Shark. Like, that card is just such a good combination of things that I see as like good blue design decisions to make blue playable, or more playable rather.
It's like they finally figured out that if you're going to make all of the creatures and the rest of the colors bigger, that you need to make blue's value creatures bigger. Like, I promise you that once upon a time, they would have printed Chrome Host Seed Shark as a 2/3.
It'd be unplayable.
And that would have been so radically different. Like, The fact that this is 6/6 flying of stats with all this upside is why this card is really good, because there's just so many aggressive threats that have, 3 power that basically no blue creatures previously, no blue utility creatures could profitably block.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I mean, Svalin is 3/4 power and toughness for 3 mana on a blue card, which is significant.
Yep.
So, I mean, it's a really simple thing. Like, it should seem really obvious, but creating blue creatures where the fact that they're creatures on board is an asset rather than a liability that's just going to get lightning bolted and then you wasted your mana, like, that's a really, really huge deal. So that's also been great. And I really do not want to see them respond to the way that things are going in Magic right now by making blue another creature color. But I really like that they're signaling that they want to print blue creatures that count.
Yeah.
That's making a big difference.
Right, and to add to this conversation, it is extremely important that these are effects on 3-drops, because blue has finishers. Blue has excellent finishers. It has Torrential Gearhulk, Sublime Epiphany, Shark Typhoon's another flash threat, technically, and it's just an excellent finisher as well if you get to stall at the game. But being able to go 3-drop and then defend, draw cards, whatever, instead of going defend, now play win con is a completely different play pattern altogether. You can run these out. There's a decent chance that they're going to survive for a turn, or you can get to that turn 6 play where you play it and defend it. You get to double spell, as opposed to just putting all of your eggs in the Torrential Gearhulk basket and just doing nothing up until the point where you cast your finisher. So these are finishers that you get out onto the board, and then you get to play your game plan out while doing something, instead of basically not just playing pure defense, just being completely reactive and then hoping that a finisher finishes out the game. And
exactly.
Again, 4 toughness just adds so much to the value. Svalin, that was Teld's suggestion. I'd never really thought about the card. I even poo-pooed it a little when we actually added to the cube. And then you play with it once or twice and you're like, okay, this is pretty good. This lines up against what the other colors are doing quite well and gives me a game plan earlier. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, as Teld said, just making as much of the blue section instant speed as possible. It makes all of the cards play well with one another. Yeah. I think in an ideal world, like, all of the creatures would have flash in our section, but we're still playing some that don't.
Man, Sea Shark with flash. Whew.
Yeah, no, I want a card like Svalin or Chrome Sea Shark to not have flash, but like they used to print dinky sorcery speed creatures in blue, and they still do. But I don't want those to cost more than 2 mana now. Like, yeah. I either want it to have an impact on the board, survive red removal, or have flash, so it plays well with the counter spells.
Yeah. Or be like Ledger Shredder.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, Ledger Shredder. How did we not bring up Ledger Shredder?
Yeah,
God,
yeah.
What an amazing blue card. Holy shit.
Hey, you know what? I missed a lot of cards in our evaluations, doing set reviews and stuff, but I had Ledger Shredder pegged as like
you did. That
might be my one win. The one card that I've ever gotten right was Ledger Shredder. I was like, this card is fantastic.
I sort of feel like Ledger Shredder just has to be like the bingo space in the middle. It's like, if you misevaluate this card, you just need to stop and readdress your priorities. Like,
I was honestly just hoping to drown out any conversation about Surge Engine, but you can go ahead and talk about it.
I know Tim absolutely despises the card. Chris and I like it a good bit. I was just going to say that I like that, it's a 2-drop, like Chris said. You can get it into play and then spend your mana on the turns you're not having to counter things. It is a little clunky. I do have to give that sometimes it doesn't line up perfectly, but I definitely like it a lot more than Chris. I think it fits pretty well into what blue is trying to do.
Yeah, so blue creatures, a little bit on the up and up over the course of the last year. A lot of what we just talked about. Svalin is from a different product altogether, but it's kind of like waiting in the wings and stuff. But the Seed Shark, Ledger Shredder, those are all within like a year and a half's time and stuff like that.
Rona's good too.
Rona's great. Yeah,
they gave us Mercurial Spelldancer. And Mercurial Spelldancer is like a narrow tempo kind of spells card. But the point being, like, we're finally starting to see them print blue creatures in good volumes, and I, for one, am extremely excited about it. Please, maybe at a different spot other than 2 now, like.
Could use some good white blue drop or blue 1-drops would be nice. Like, they're all flying men with like minor upside.
Did anyone else expect Theo to just like dive in from nowhere and say, Agent of Rafine?
Yeah, we don't use the A word, the alchemy word on this podcast because people get mad about it. But yeah, that card's excellent, but it's not fair. So whatever. The effects are getting better, and this This is almost like entirely from the last set, right? Again, if we had started this podcast a month ago, we'd be like, blue sucks and stuff like that.
I was ready to do this episode 2 months ago, and I was so full of poison. And I got to be honest, I'm really happy to be having the back end half of this conversation now and talking about what we're excited about and what we're excited for in the future. Because when we first pitched this episode, I was just going to vomit for like an hour.
Yeah, this was originally subtitled like "Old Men Yell at Clouds" or whatever.
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons we get to kind of like turn our opinion around is because Lord of the Rings actually gave us some counter magic that we're excited to play, and was in. Me and Chris had a conversation a while ago. It was like, what do we want our counter magic to look like? And one of the answers was we want it to add to the board while countering spells. And we got Saruman's Trickery, which is the 1 blue. Counter any spell and mass orcs 1, right? It's a little Mystic Snake. It's not an excellent card. Like, it's not a fantastic all-timer counter spell. But in our card pool, well, you know, when we're playing cancels that just cycle and stuff like that and don't really, like, it's just 1-for-1 counter spells with maybe a little bit of upside. Being able to throw a 1/1 on board while countering spells is what we want our counter spells to do. Obviously, we would like slightly stronger effects than this, but this isn't uncommon. You know, it was a good pickup, and it was a good move in the right direction as far as cancel variants go. And then we also got Stern Skolden.
That card's insane.
Stern Skolden is like excellent. This is blue, a single
Fatal
blue mana.
Shush.
Yeah, Fatal Shush, as people apparently call it. Single blue mana, counter, correct me if I'm wrong, counter a creature with power or toughness 2 or less?
Yes, power or toughness.
Yep.
Yeah, and this is a 1 mana counter spell that hits every single 2-drop in our cube, a lot of the 3-drops, and occasionally just like ganks a 5-drop like Angel of Invention or a huge Stone Coil Serpent. Yeah.
Angel of Invention was already down, and just like, I feel like this is the card that's just, you know, how hard do you have to beat a dead horse?
Like a 1 mana counterspell that can occasionally snag a 5-drop is already just great. But the fact that it's a 1 mana counterspell that you can have on the draw and still counter your opponent's 2-drop, and it counters every single 2-drop in the cube. Yeah, Stern Skolden, Saruman's Trickery, just single-handedly from the Lord of the Rings set. If this is like what we can expect from counter magic moving forward, we'll be a lot happier. You know, field out those essence scatters and rejects and stuff like that, the quench variants, and just get hard counter spells that either add to the board or, you know, play up on curve. And there's a lot of them traditionally that exist that we don't have on Arena. But we don't have them, so we can't play them.
Scolding is especially sweet to me because, like, what I desperately want them to do, and I still desperately want them to do this, and if I could, like, snap my fingers and make it happen, or legally threaten someone at Wizards, and get them to do this, like, I want to see, you know, I want to see the make disappears of the world get replaced with miscalc. You know, I want my censor to get replaced with Mana Leak. Like, that's what I really want. But what's cool about Stern Scolding is it's not just an upgrade in that kind of like 2-mana counterspell space. This is like a legitimately interesting design, and it's also quite good. You're still 1-for-1ing, but if you can have a turn in your control deck, like on turn 3, where you get to like resolve your Search for Azcanta to get it down and get that value engine going, and then, you know, counter the Adeline that's coming down, or something like that.
Probably not countering that one, because that one's always a 4/4 on the stack. But
well, it's always a 4/4 on the stack. I mean, like if you controlled the early game, but
yeah,
sure.
Yeah.
But you take my point, right? Like if you manage to sneak out a value engine and still counter a creature for 1 mana, the difference in the tempo swing in that game compared to you just having to hold up all of your mana and cancel it is enormous. It's so big.
The first time you get to like you hold up 1 mana and counter their, you know, their cheap follow-up play they tried to play, that's the moment you realize you're playing with a good card. Like it is real sweet.
It's quite good. Saruman's Trickery has also been quite nice. I jammed my Adeline. I went 1-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop, and I was like, I can't lose. I'm playing against a control deck. And I jammed my Adeline, and my opponent, you know, Saruman's Trickery did. And it's not like the old days where they like, what was that card called from Amonkhet? The one that like either digs through your library or
Supreme Will?
Supreme Will. It's not like I got Supreme Willed or whatever. It's like, okay, my Adeline got countered, and then I was like, well, that 1/1 trades with my 1-drop, and they're going to untap with 4 mana, and that 1 body on board, it really makes a big difference. Probably gained him like 4 to 6 virtual life because they didn't resolve another creature for quite some time. So more stuff like this, more cheap cards like Chrome Host Seed Shark that put legitimate beef on board to keep you alive while furthering your game plan. counter spells that offer you some kind of board impact. Magic is happening on the board these days, and it's happening really fast, and blue needs an invite to that party.
Cantrips as well. And traditionally
Yes.
there's a ton of cantrips out there, so this is not a problem for your legacy cubes and stuff like that. But in the historic card pool, there's somewhere in the ballpark of 5 to 6 1-mana blue spells that turn into another card, and some of them don't do anything extra at all, so we don't play them. But you have Sleight of Hand pegged as a card that's coming out of the next Eldraine set, which is coming up. We're just going to add, like, the more cantrips we can get right now, the better. They're one of blue's best things, most synergistic things that it can do. So Sleight of Hand, perfectly serviceable, even though it's not like one of the best cantrips of all time. You mentioned Miscalc as well. We almost got Miscalc. Apparently Miscalc was slated to be in one of the recent anthologies and was pulled. But some of the best, like, we don't need mana drain, but I think in standard's so powerful now, you could put Mana Leak, you could put traditional counterspell, blue counterspell, you could put Miscalc. I think you could put these in standard without making it a completely miserable environment and have control be viable. And of course, if you put those in standard, then that means we get them. So we're a little bit biased, a little bit greedy, but I think standard, with us just talking about the threats and the state of blue and stuff like that, you got to make the counter magic match up a little bit better. And I think that means you can bring back some of the classically good counter spells without like ruining standard. And to be honest, it might already be ruined anyway. But so
I'm excited because, like you said, we're getting the Sleight of Hand reprint. They almost gave us Miscalc. I'm assuming that they're saving that for some other anthology because they probably know how bad we want it. But the fact that these cards are in the conversation now, what that says to me is I think they've been really terrified to have blue be a really powerful color and constructed for a long time, because there was a period in Magic's history where there were control formats and the control matchup is miserable and constructed. And not only that, but they've had a really large influx from the player base of Hearthstone, which I want to make very clear. I'm not shitting on Hearthstone. I played a lot of Hearthstone. It's why I'm back playing Magic after all these years, because of Hearthstone. Hearthstone's a fine game, but it's a game that does not include counter magic. And I think that there were probably a lot of incoming players in the Arena era that the first time they got a spell countered were really, really displeased.
if you've ever taken a browse through the MTGA subreddit, you find those pretty frequently popping up. If you could just browse for a couple of minutes, you'll find people complaining about counter magic.
Oh, I wrote a Reddit post about how we needed to improve the quality of counter magic in standard, and like I was a little pompous about it, but Jesus Christ, I got savage. And somebody straight up came out and said that Draw Go should never exist as a deck, and I was like, okay, you need to get the fuck out of my game because we were here first. Sorry, little old codger energy there, but like I'm not even a blue player, but I'm not about to listen to somebody who's been playing this game for 2 years tell me that one of the pillars of this game is not supposed to be like existent in any format. Like if we ever get to a place where counter magic is just not a thing, then Magic's not the same game.
Also, if I ever play constructed, your suffering is my enjoyment, and I need to have that be playable.
You know what people need to do? People need to realize that control matches don't have to go forever if you know when to quit. Anybody watch UFC? You can hold on through a tap out until your arm breaks in half, right? But what you did there was you broke your own goddamn arm. The second you realize that you can't get out of that hold, you tap the mat and you move on to the next fight. That's what you do, right? I don't see a substantial difference in frustration between, can I play my 2-drop? No. Can I play my 3-drop? No. Can I play my 4-drop? No. Here's my finisher. The game is over. Is that really more frustrating than me being on the draw and my red opponent going 1-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop, 4-drop, you're dead? Like, it's basically the same. It's a different side of the same coin. You've been dead since turn 2. Like, the game has been over. It's just a question of whether or not you recognize it. Like, you are sort of the master of your own frustration when it comes to playing against control decks, and sorry, I've kind of dragged this off down like a different topic. Like, I'm not trying to sell anybody who hates blue and liking blue, but like when I first started playing Magic, like I didn't like having my spells countered either. But then I realized at a certain point after I started playing a lot of constructed, the type of game that you play against a draw go deck, the decisions that you make, the tension, the trade-offs, the when you go for it, all of these elements of playing into a control deck are so radically different from playing into any other kind of deck. And it adds a richness and a diversity to the gameplay experience. So that's just my little side rant. Like, if you really, really hate control, first of all, play best of 3 and put some duresses in your sideboard. And second, just have some patience, and I think that you will come to find with time that you will appreciate the dynamics of those games if you give yourself the opportunity to learn the best ways to approach them and treat it like the puzzle and the mind game that it is.
I think Control is one of the way that Control exists in Magic is unique to card games. I've played a bunch of them: Hearthstone, Legends of Runeterra. Was it? There's a couple of the other weird ones. Marvel Snap was one I played for a little bit. None of those have a control deck that we think of in Magic with, really just generating interaction and card advantage. They typically exist as like a prison deck. And so I think that and the sequencing around the playing against Control is I find it fun, like trying to, overload your opponent's counter magics, knowing when to pressure them versus their draw spells. But that being said, I think it's a unique thing to Magic the Gathering that, I would like to see continue existing. And right now, as per Control, from what I understand in Standard, is pretty good. So hopefully that's something that they're still considering.
But counter magic make me sad.
Counter magic make me sad. So does Lightning Bolt. Lightning Bolt makes me sad.
Especially when you're at 3.
Yeah. Two things that we didn't put them in the notes, but I think they're worth mentioning here. And then we'll go ahead and get to what we want out of Blue moving forward, wrap things up. But I feel like we should have mentioned this, that there's a lot better colorless generic card draw as well now. Like if you look at the One Ring, Reckoner Bankbuster, you just put that in any deck and it's going to draw you 3 cards over the course of the game, and then it's going to beat your face in. Like why are you playing blue for card advantage if you can just have it on a colorless card? Palantir of Orthanc, the One Ring, like we could get into those, but these card advantage cards on colorless cards that also just do other things make it so that you don't really need to go into blue for card draw. And then there's also like this influx of blue hosers, like from Lord of the Rings alone. Orcish Bowmaster just shits on card draw. Complete, like, first off, design mistake, right? Obvious design mistake. We have no idea what happened there. But then we also got Delighted Halfling, which is like a fine dork, but also screw blue counter magic. Just
like, randomly makes things uncounterable for no apparent reason. It comes
up a lot too. It's surprising how many, because like legendary creatures oftentimes get a bit of power budget, and this also includes like Great Hinge and Planeswalkers. Yeah.
And the reason I thought of that and wanted to bring it up is because I was like, what if they do make blue counter magic better and constructed? What they're going to do is they're going to reprint like Cavern of Souls, or they're going to reprint like some complete hoser that makes it so that the counter magic doesn't work and be like, there's your counter magic.
Luckily, gentlemen, that does not affect us.
Exactly. We wouldn't care. We'd be like, haha, take that Standard, give us the counter magic.
Well, in the immortal words of Justin Parnell from his 540 podcast, I mean, it's good for cubes. Sacrifice a constructed format. Sacrifice 3. I don't give a shit.
Yeah, we wouldn't care, but I'm sure people out there would. But at any rate, let's go ahead and close out here by just saying, let's go through all 3 of us one at a time here. Chris, if you want to start us off, what do you want from blue that you think would improve it? And I guess we should specify whether we're talking about blue in a whole or specifically our cube.
We're talking about our cube. And I think we're also kind of talking about the historic card pool and like modern Magic in general broadly. Like I think we can conflate those two things a little bit. As far as like talking about what cards we want on the historic card pool, still we could talk about that. But
more like, what do you want to see new? Like not just cards that we could pull from the past, but what's a direction you want to see blue move in the future, or a type of card that you want to see pushed or something like that traditionally hasn't been?
I would like to see... I don't want to see blue get reimagined. I don't want that. I don't want them to throw up their hands and just say, like, okay, we live in a world where everyone has card advantage, so that's not really blue's thing anymore. There's multiple ways to interact on the stack. Like, blue doesn't really need to be special. So what is blue going to do now? I don't want them to reimagine what blue is. We're building on a 30-year foundation. I don't want us to jump off of a cliff. What I want to see is them print card selection cards of the caliber where the cube community doesn't get excited about Thirst for Discovery. I don't want to get excited about Thirst for Discovery. I want to get excited for a card that says 3 mana, draw 3 mana, discard, or draw 3 cards, discard a card. Like, I don't think there needs to be a rider on that. I'm going up a card for 3 mana. For example. You actually have a suggestion here that I like a lot. I don't want to take it from you.
Sure.
You think they could print this, right?
Yeah, so I'm trying to phrase this in a way where someone listening isn't just immediately like, well, this guy has no idea what he's talking about. What an idiot. But I think, honestly, this going back to me saying that blue should be dominant in something on the color pie. I think it needs to plant itself as the best card advantage color again, which I don't think it can do without argument right now. And I think it needs something that says, I am the card advantage color in 2023. The rest of you are going to get card advantage, but it's not going to be as good as mine. And I think the way you do that is you start moving divination down to a 2-mana spell instead of a 3-mana spell. And you could be really safe with this instead of you could do limited. Blue sorcery, draw 2 cards, and I think you could print that and say it would be a very powerful card. But I mean, is it really that much more powerful than Sign in Blood? Like, not really. No. And the experiment that I wanted to do real quick, which I've mentioned to both of you before, is like, what does a 2-mana draw spell or a 2-mana draw 2 look like in each color? And there's an answer for most colors that aren't blue, right? White gets like your Spirited Companion, just a cantrip and creature where the creature is the second card. Black already has Sign in Blood, Night's Whisper, painful choice on Arena, stuff like that. You know, draw 2, but you're going to take some damage. Red has like infinite light up the stage variants like Ren's Resolve, Reckless Impulse, stuff like that. You know, it's going to draw 2 cards, but it has a timing restriction on when you can play them. Green doesn't really have it, but green is specializing in the ramp and stuff like that. And it even gets cards like Explore, which in a lot of ways is a draw 2.
I would like to put out Invasion of Ixalan as Green's draw 2.
Yeah.
Sure, yeah, the cantrip. The cantrips are worth mentioning. A cantrip that is going to turn into a creature later in the game might as well be a draw 2. But blue, like, what does blue get? Chart a Course or like a draw 2, discard 1 at instant speed? Yeah, you don't end up getting 2 cards all the time. And if blue wants to be the best color at drawing cards, it needs to have something that's better than the other draw 2s in other colors, which I think would be a 2-mana draw 2, even if you want to be really safe and make it a blue sorcery to start off with, and then, you know, see if you want to push the buttons later to make it an instant or make it 1 blue or something like that. But that's what I want to see from blue in the future, is just 2-mana draw 2 without stipulation.
I wanted you to call that out because I was looking at that and I was like, that's like Tim's card that he put out here, but it dovetails perfectly with what I kind of feel, which is I don't want blue to be reimagined. It's okay if we push into new design space, that's fine, but I don't want blue's core to be reimagined, and I'm fine with every color having card advantage as long as blue is still better at it than everyone else.
Yeah. So Chris wants 5-mana 6/6s in blue. I just want to be able to draw spells. Teld, what do you want from blue moving forward?
So yeah, like I said, I kind of have the hot take here. I think blue, the fact that blue has no way to deal with the resolve permanent has been a problem for a while. We're starting to see other colors get it. I mean, green gets fight spells tagged onto creatures on top of just having their creatures, you know, every creature they play is the Abyss. And like, we've kind of reached a point in Magic where it sort of feels like the color pie is dead insofar as a restriction, and it's more of a flavor justification. And so with that, I would like to see them start using stuff like Phase Out as a removal mechanic. So just imagine with me for a moment, Journey to Nowhere, but instead of exiling, it phases out, like blue, enchantment or artifact or whatever. You play it, it removes a creature until it gets destroyed. I don't know if that might be too pushed, but something in that sort of vein of using like blue's flavor mechanics to justify giving them actual removal. We've seen like some removal unlimited, like, you know, Bind the Monsters, Bubble Snare type cards. But those cards are like universally terrible. I think we can make those a little better, especially if we put it uncommon.
The problem with stuff like that is that your opponent always gets ETBs, and then you witness protection their creature, and they're still gonna just beat you down with the 1/1. But I think that's a good idea. What do you like? There's what is it? Slip Out the Back. You know, if we could get a version of that's more, Slip Out the Back is the 1-mana blue instant, target creature phases out, and then I think it phases back in with a +1/+1 counter. If you could get something like that catches the creature before it enters the battlefield, like the next creature your opponent has that enters the battlefield enters phased out and then doesn't come in for a couple turns, or like blue Banisher Priest, you basically said the same thing, like phase out a creature until this creature leaves the battlefield. I think that's a good way to answer things. It's still always going to be like 1-for-1 at the end of the day, but at least it would give blue a way to deal with something that slipped past the counter magic that's not friggin' witness protection or whatever. Like those cards.
Yeah, unless you're playing Turbo Fog, witness protection is not very good. And even then, it's like I have to play this, or you know. No, I want to play this.
We have tried a lot of those variants, and they do not work in a cube environment when everything that you're playing is a value creature and stuff like that. So
I will shout out Stasis Field came close. Like, Stasis Field is a pretty reasonable Magic card.
well, which one's Stasis Field?
That's the one from Mom that's 1 and a blue enchantment, and it turns the creature into an O2 defender. That
sure.
one, like, because it keeps the creature from attacking, it was like reasonably efficient. I think that one was like kind of borderline.
Yeah, if you could get a version of that somehow that sticks the creature before it gets the ETB, I could see that being like fantastic. But yeah, improve the draw spells, improve the counter magic, improve blue, like make blue better. Okay, do we have any final thoughts there on blue? Does anyone want to wrap up everything we've said, or anyone got any dying hills they want to stand on about Surge Engine before we wrap up here?
No, I'm just happy to say that for the first time in a while about blue for Historic Cube, I'm optimistic.
Yeah, it is nice. We were really down on blue for a while, so it's nice to have it feel like it's going somewhere positive. So that's a really good feeling.
Yeah, I got to join one cube draft over the course of like the last 5 months, and I drafted blue-black and went 2-1 and felt like my deck was really good, and I lost to a good deck. And I was a predominantly blue deck, so it felt good. It felt a lot better than it did 5 months ago, and I think a lot of that is due to cards that we're getting recently. And we think that there's room in upcoming sets, in upcoming designs to make blue better. And make it more of a contender and constructed without, ruining a format or anything like that, and just having it keep up with what the other colors are doing. So, again, shout out to the Commander players. Get on it. Complain about blue until Wizards makes blue good, because those are the people that we listen to now. So, yeah, that's going to go ahead and do it. Thanks as always to everyone for listening. Remember that the best way to support Jank Diver Gaming and the Jank Tank here is by joining our Discord server. You can come draft with us. Give us your feedback. It's a great place to hang out with like-minded individuals and talk about Cube, Retail Limited, all things Magic. We draft the Unrestricted Cube, which is kind of what we've been talking about here. I should have mentioned specifically that we're talking about Unrestricted Cube, but we drafted that cube, the more powerful one, on Sundays at 7:30 Eastern, and we have our Peasant Cube and Specialty Cubes on Wednesdays at 7:30 Eastern. You can also find links to our Discord wherever you're listening to this podcast. You can also find our socials on Twitter at Jank Diver Gaming, or it's not called Twitter anymore, it's called X or whatever, but we're on Twitter. I mostly just shout at people and give them a reason to shout back at me. You can find us on YouTube at youtube.com/JankDiverGaming, and you can find Teld on Twitch at twitch.tv/Teld Talks, TELD Talks, where sometimes you stream our Unrestricted Cubes on Sunday night.
Yeah, pretty much every Unrestricted or Wednesday Cube that I draft, I stream, and I'm there for most of them.
Cool. Oh, should probably mention, we will have an upcoming episode. I don't know what we're going to talk about next, but we do have a Wilds of Eldraine coming up within a month's time, and I'm sure we will do our best to get an actual releasable set review up. So we'll see how to do that with 3 people. It might be that sometimes we're just 2 people, sometimes it's some combination of the 3 people you're listening to today. But thanks for listening. I hope everybody had a good time railing on blue and being constructive about it. And we'll see you all next time.
Take it easy, folks.
Take care. And then there's the other one, which is Celadine and Sea and Sky. I believe I said that right.